Well, for more, we can bring in our international affairs editor, Kethevane Gorjestani. Hi, Kethevane.
Hi.
The world then has been focused on this fragile ceasefire in Iran, but the 40 days of war have left deep scars on the country.
Yes, there was a sense definitely of relief when Donald Trump didn't make good on his threat to simply wipe out the Iranian civilization. But the impact on the ground has been absolutely major. According to the U.S.-based human rights activist news agency, at least 1,700 civilians were killed in these 40 days of war, including 254 children. At least 30 universities, according to the Iranian Ministry of Science, were hit during this war, including Tehran's top technology university, the Sharif University. The World Health Organization, they say that they have verified at least 20 attacks on healthcare facilities, and the UN's refugee agency says that more than 3 million Iranians were temporarily displaced, especially at the beginning of the conflict. You add to all of that the fact that the strikes have been hitting crucial elements of everyday life for Iranians, whether it's bridges, railways, also steel plants, as well as companies, pharmaceutical companies, for example. The war has also meant that an economy that was already struggling is only getting worse. Even before the war, we were talking about the skyrocketing prices for everyday basic needs, and that has only gotten worse. Remember that the January protests, they came mostly because of cost of living issues, and this is not getting better because of this war. One thing that the war has not also been able to stop is the crackdown from the Iranian regime on dissent. The regime has, it seems, executed at least a dozen people since the start of the war on February 28th, with the regime appearing to still be strong enough not only to wage a war for 40 days, but also to continue to target those that it sees as being elements that are trying to hurt the nation from within.
Well, speaking of the Iranian leadership, it's still very much in place despite Donald Trump's claims of regime change.
Absolutely. And Donald Trump and his administration have pretty much gone back and forth on the idea of whether or not regime change was even a goal in the first place. If we go back to those January protests in Iran and the crackdown that follows, remember that truth by Donald Trump that said help is on the way, telling those protesters that the U.S. was going to come and help them. Now you have an exclusive report by the New York Times that reports that regime change was definitely and clearly discussed between Donald Trump and the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who told Trump that going after Iran would quickly lead to regime change. But according to that report, the CIA director, John Ratcliffe, called Netanyahu's regime change scenario, quote, farcical. And the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, added, in other words, it's bullshit, in the words of the Secretary of State, according to that reporting from the New York Times. Now, whatever the discussions at the time, Donald Trump and his administration are at least now claiming that there has been a regime change. Just yesterday, Donald Trump on Truth Social posting this: the United States will work closely with Iran, which we have determined has gone through what will be a very productive regime change. The argument is we've killed the leadership, starting with the Ayatollah, and therefore, as Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, said, there is a different group of people in charge, therefore there is a regime change. That's not exactly how regime change works, especially not in Iran, where the power is not concentrated in the hands of one person, but rather in a system. And by all accounts of experts of Iran, the idea is that not only are the people now in place stronger and more hardline, but the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, they have been strengthened. What this shows is that just like in Venezuela, Donald Trump talked about regime change, but he meant regime change as a regime that will want to do a deal with him, leaving aside the people, the civilians who were calling for that regime change with the help of the United States.
All right, Kethevane Gorjestani, thank you very much for breaking it down for us.